scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. The words will be on the screen, and you can also find them on page 733 in your Pew Bible, if you'd like to follow along. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where the child was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went, and look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. Here ends the reading. Spirit of God, stir up your people. Thanks be to God. Our hero this week is Shannon, Meister. I want to invite Miss Shannon to come up. And she said she wants to wear the cape, so I am ready for the cape. You even dressed for it. You're going to kind of look like Superman once you put it on.
Okay.
Right? Or Rocky.
Now, just so you know, I'm not wearing the cape because I feel like a hero. I just really like the cape.
It's kind of fabulous, isn't it?
It's like Halloween.
It's like Halloween. We've had Christmas. We've had Halloween. I promise.
All the holidays.
We love July here, I promise. Okay, so tell us, Shannon, what all are you currently doing within the church and the denomination? Because I don't think people always see that.
Okay, that's a long list, but I'll try to go quick. So I'm the event planner here at church, which means when it comes to things like the Storm Chasers game, the block party, I kind of help coordinate all that. And I by no means do all that. I just help coordinate it. People say, "Hey, let's have this food truck," or "let's have these people." And I say, "Okay, great, make it happen." And I just kind of keep a tally of everybody who's coming so we don't get 5 Mexican trucks and whatever. So we want to kind of just coordinate all that is what I do, and that's fun. And I do that as part of my day job too. So that's mostly what I do at church. I also am on DCOM, which is the District Committee on Ordained Ministries. So basically, we kind of help people as they're discerning their call to ministry, and once they've discerned that in their home church, we're the next step for them to go on. I just got elected to jurisdictional conference, which I'm not even sure how to explain that, other than we elect bishops is basically what we do, right, at jurisdictional conference. They meet once every 4 years, and I'm not quite sure how I got elected, but that was their mistake, I guess. I don't know. And I just got back. So I transferred my membership. I've been coming to Broadway forever, but I kept my membership in Missouri for a long time because they raised me, right? Like, I was born in Iowa, but the Missouri church raised me. I just transferred my membership to Iowa a few years ago, when the Missouri United Methodist Women at that time, now Women in Faith, were like, "Hey, we want you to come back to Mission U." So I just got back from that weekend because I am the Associate Dean of Mission U, which means I'll get to run the deal in a couple of years, which is a lot of pressure.
What's Mission U?
Mission U is basically a study or a class. It used to be, I think, School for Missions. You probably know as much about this as I do, where you go and you learn about different issues and social issues that we care about, right, as people of God, basically. So it's kind of basically a mini school, like a Thursday through Saturday school. It's kind of a big deal that I'm not sure I'm ready for. Good thing I've got a couple years so they can train me up. Am I missing anything that you can think of? Those were all the things I had in my mental list.
Well, and you also just show up every time we have a cleaning day, or
I just like to be around, right? I grew up in servant ministry type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
That's what I got.
Thank you. What was the first or most significant time you remember knowing you were hearing from God?
Man, you just jump right into the meat of it, don't you?
I
know
did.
she sent these to me ahead of time. I'm just giving her a hard time.
I warned her.
She did. So, okay, the first time, let's do the most significant time I can remember hearing from God. My mom and my grandma, they have always talked about getting nudges from God, right? And I never really experienced that. Maybe a little, but you never know if it's really just your conscience talking to you. But my mom will be 7 years cancer-free next month, which is awesome. But 7 years ago, she went through what the doctors called a routine mastectomy. She was diagnosed with stage 0 cancer. The doctor's like, we've got to do a mastectomy, no big deal. You can go home that day, you can stay in the hospital a couple days, whatever. My mom and stepdad live 100 miles from the hospital where she had the procedure. So she decided to stay a couple days to make sure she was good. That was on a Friday. I was working for the Council Bluffs Recycling Center at that time and had an event on Saturday that was like, I'm going to come back for the event. Mom's fine. The doctors have her. My stepdad was staying with her. And my plan was to come back and work on Saturday, go to church Sunday morning, because we had something happening that I thought I wanted to be there for, and to pick up Aunt Pat, because Aunt Pat was going to go home and be the caretaker. I do a lot of things fairly well. Caretaking is not one of them. I just don't have the patience for it. So my plan was come back, get Aunt Pat. We were either going to go to Columbia and pick up Mom, or my stepdad would just take Mom home, and we would meet them there. Sunday morning, I talked to Mom on Saturday, and she was pretty good, a little loopy, but, she'd had a big procedure, right? And she was 65. She'd just gotten on Medicare. This is going to be a long story. Is that okay? All right.
I have a short sermon. Knock yourself out.
Perfect. So I got a call from the doctors at 8 or 8:30 on Sunday morning, which is never good to begin with, right? And the doctor said, cool doctor, young, actually I think from Omaha or area or something, and said, I don't mean to alarm you. And you can imagine the cuss words that went through my head, because that's not the call you want on a Sunday morning. I don't mean to alarm you, but your mom's blood pressure isn't great, and her kidneys never really started working after the surgery. And she didn't say it in so many words, but that's the long and the short of it. So ironically, my dad, who was also struggling with cancer, had stayed there, and I think maybe he was coming to church with me. And my dad and I don't have a great relationship. So I basically sent him on his way and said, I need to go take care of this. Called up Aunt Pat and said, get to Council Bluffs as soon as you can. We're headed to Columbia. And she's like, okay. It's usually about a 5-hour drive to Columbia, and even driving 80 or 85, we didn't make it a whole lot quicker. And I got to the hospital, and my mom looked like a balloon. Her kidneys never really started working after the surgery on Friday, and she wasn't real coherent. And I walked in, and she said, I'm sorry. And I was like, you have nothing to be sorry for. I'm sorry I left. They don't really know what happened, but 48 hours after surgery, by Sunday night or Monday morning, she was on life support for 21 days. It was the hardest 21 days of my life, I'm pretty sure. And I remember writing her a Christmas letter that year, thank you for your prayers, because we had people around the nation praying for her, because I didn't have words, right? You've been there, I'm sure, when you just don't have words to pray. But at one point, God and I had talked enough about the fact that if it was her time, it was okay. And I was okay with that. But I woke up one morning, we had stayed in hotels, we had stayed with friends, and I woke up one morning at super early for me, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, considering I hadn't been sleeping much to begin with. And it wasn't an audible voice, but it was an overwhelming feeling of, she's gonna be okay. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I wanna go back to sleep, right? Because I was exhausted, mentally, physically, spiritually exhausted. And it came again, she's gonna be okay. This is gonna work out. And I was like, okay. And I had to come back. I'd been at the hospital the better part of 2.5 weeks. And I had to come back because I was scheduled to go to a recycling conference in New Orleans that was a all-inclusive trip paid. I probably could have gotten out of it, but my sense of responsibility said, you need to go. And I couldn't do anything at the hospital, right? I'd made all the decisions. They'd ran all the tests. Aunt Pat had been there, my stepdad had come back and forth, but I'm an only child, so what it really amounted to was it was up to me. And my poor stepdad was a mess through this whole thing. But there was just this overwhelming feeling of it's going to be okay. And I think it was just the next day or the day after, I was at the Epley Airport getting ready to fly to New Orleans for this conference, and I got a call that they had taken her off the life support. And they had tried before, and I had watched that, and it was horrible. So I'm like standing in the airport bawling, and I'm sure people thought I was crazy. But it was okay. And I mean, it was not an easy road. She went through rehab, and she did all the things. But she's amazing, right? And I had this overwhelming feeling. So there's a new story that you haven't heard, because when she passed out this spring, because her blood pressure was super low, we called the ambulance, and they live in a rural area, and the ambulance was a county away. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. While we were on the phone with 911, I was like, you know what, if we can get her to the car, we will just take her to Columbia, because they don't trust the doctors in their rural area. They're great. They're not great in a crisis. I was like, by the time the ambulance gets here, we will be halfway to Columbia. So, passed out, I thought maybe she'd had a stroke, and she was coherent enough that I could tell her that, and by the time we got to the car, she's like, I don't have a stroke, because I don't have this symptom, and I don't have this symptom. I was like, I don't care, we're taking you to the hospital, because she still wasn't 100%, right? So we take her to Columbia. I'm driving way faster than I need to on these back roads, and thank goodness my stepdad did not say a word, because that's not his personality. And I was just like, God, let this be okay. Help us have a safe trip. Let this be okay. Those were the only words I had. And again, you realize she's been mine longer than she's been yours. And I was like, son of a gun, if you would talk to me about other things in my life, like you talked to me about my mom, God, it would sure be helpful. But there is something about my mom that I hear God more. So that's what I got.
Okay, I almost skipped a question.
Don't skip a question.
So
I practiced.
you are clear. So one of the things that happens sometimes in the United Methodist Church is that when we see somebody with gifts and graces, especially like Shannon's, because some of you have heard her preach, right? Clearly she's comfortable talking in front of you. She starts to get uncomfortable phone calls. Hey, when are you going into the ministry?
I'm a nervous wreck when I stand up here. Y'all probably don't know that, but I really am. Go ahead.
You're clear that you are not called to full-time set-apart ministry like I'm in. How has that call been clarified in your life? Short story.
Short story?
Short story.
Okay. I told her it was a long story. So going back to talking to God and listening to God, right? How I started speaking is often ironic too, because when my junior year in high school, I thought my mom wanted to go to ladies speaking school, and she thought I wanted to go. And I think it was it wasn't like a week or two later, it was like a year later that we're like, we thought each other wanted to go. And that's kind of how I got into it. What was the question?
How you're not called to be like me.
No.
You're called to stay a lay person. How did you come to that clarification?
By default? I'm not sure. I've had loads of people say, you should go into full-time ministry. And it's not that God doesn't ever talk through other people, because he absolutely does. But if I'm going to spend 3 or 4 years in seminary and several $1,000s, God's got to tell me a much stronger sense of call than I have now. I love what I do. I love speaking occasionally. I love kind of being a little bit of everything, right? I can get my fingers in this and that and not have to do it all the time. That's a lot of stress, y'all. These pastors, they do a lot, and they put up with a lot with us. I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
I didn't tell her to say that.
No, she did not. When you think about being a full-time pastor, it's a lot of stress, and there's a lot that goes into that. Mm-hmm. So, over time, I guess, because I'm comfortable with where I am, and that's been this discussion with God, is if you want me to be somewhere else, you got to make it super, super clear, God, because otherwise I'm good.
Is there a time you want to tell us about where obedience felt particularly challenging or even risky?
This was probably the hardest question you gave me, because nothing really came to mind. As the event planner, anytime we spend money on something that may or may not work always feels risky to me, and we just try to surround that in prayer. But following God it's inconvenient most of the time, right? Jesus didn't say, come and I'll make you fishers of men, and it will be the easiest job you ever had. He purposely picked people that knew what hard work was and knew what it was to fail sometimes. I got home from this church event last night that I'd been at for 3 days, and I was grumpy and I was tired, and my lawn needed mowed because I leave again today for work, and I didn't want to mow in the 95-degree weather we're supposed to have. And my neighbors are super cool, and they have taken care of my lawn a couple times this summer, and they took care of my driveway a couple times, and their lawn hadn't been mowed either, and I knew they were headed up, gone over the weekend on a trip. And I was like, okay, one step at a time. I'm gonna mow my lawn. And I got my front yard mowed, and I was like, it's not that much work to go over and do theirs. So I did, and I had a million reasons, right? Because this was the first thing I thought when I was in the driveway. I was like, theirs needs mowed too. I can find 100 reasons why I shouldn't have to mow their lawn. It would be a whole lot easier to say thank you and give them an Amazon gift card. But if we're supposed to be Jesus' hands and feet, right? Sometimes it means being Jesus' hands and feet and sucking it up and doing the things we don't want to do. And I mowed their lawn. And I felt pretty darn good about it, but I didn't want to go let them know it was me because I was hoping I would surprise them. But apparently they saw me because I thought they were gone. But apparently they saw me and they texted me, thank you so much. And I was like, yeah, it was way more God than me, I'm pretty sure. Just giving that nudge. But it's not convenient to follow God and to be a disciple, right?
Right.
So that's just the most recent example.
What would you say to folks who are wondering if they have heard from God or not? And this is your last question. So
This one was the second hardest. You know, God speaks in a lot of ways. Through nature, through other people. It's really about prayer. And if you're really struggling with something, a lot of times you can follow your gut, and that's probably God. But get other people to help you and pray for you and pray about whatever it is. When I complain to my mom, when I call her up and be like, hey, I don't know what to do about this, I sometimes don't even get the sentence finished because I'll be, but I haven't prayed about it. I probably should start there. And she's like, yeah, you probably should. Because she went through this whole, it was right after she became a pastor. And every time I would call her with a problem, she'd be like, just pray about it. Just pray about it. I was like, no, at some point I need you to be my mom and not a pastor. But she's trained me well because really it's all about prayer. It's about listening to God as much as talking and getting other people to pray about things with you. And it's pretty clear usually. Sometimes way clear, sometimes not as much.
thanks.
I think it's meant for a kid. I
Oh.
need a bigger cape.
Sure. Okay.
Not as skinny as I used to be.
Next year I'll buy a bigger cape if we do this again. So Shannon did a great job. I could just sit down, but Carrie's not up here yet, so I'm going to keep talking. I asked Shannon to come talk today because her story, you have such good timing, you have no idea. Her story encapsulates what I wanted us to hear, is that so many times when we talk about a call to ministry, we automatically jump to the role of pastor. But the reality is that every single one of us has a call. Every single one of us has a call. Now, Shannon made some jokes about how her call is, she said yes to the call by default. But I think there's really important discernment work that happens when we say to ourselves, you know what, I don't feel like I want to engage in that type of work. Or I don't really feel like my role involves X, Y, Z. So the answer is no, and by saying no, I've carved out that option, right? It's no longer an option for me. I actually think Shannon has done some really powerful discernment work, mostly because she and I have sat in my office and I've asked her about it. I'm like, everyone tells me you're called to ministry. What's going on here? And so we had a big conversation about it, and I went, okay, I won't ask you anymore. Now I know, right? Now I know what the answer is. Every single one of us has a call. And this scripture lesson that we read today helps us figure out how to answer some of those big questions. Some of the questions that I get when people come into my office is, how do I hear from God? How do I hear from God? Well, look at the Magi. The Magi came to the truth of God not through doing something different, but through doing what they've always done. The Magi are astrologers. They're interpreters of dreams. They're studiers of the sky. Their whole purpose is to use their wisdom to help guide rulers and the wealthy. We're not even sure that they have a Jewish background to know who the Most High God is. They hear from God because they're still looking at the stars and God speaks through nature. So how do you hear from God? By looking at and observing and doing the thing that you already know how to do. Because I can guarantee you God is already speaking to you through that. Whether it is other people or hiking in nature, whatever your job or your hobbies entail, God will talk to you through those. Our only requirement is that we keep our eyes and our ears and our hearts and our minds open and assume that God is talking to us. The moment we do that, it will get super creepy. It will. There's no other word for it. It's kind of Twilight Zone. Whenever I realize God has been like shouting at me and I've been missing it because I haven't had my heart open, the moment I open up my heart, I'm like, holy cow. God is talking everywhere through everything. How do I follow God? Notice that the Magi followed God in their own way. Again, the Magi do this entire journey following the star, following the same things they've been looking at their entire life, trusting what they already know, and sharing the wealth they already have. They followed God as they were. They didn't become something completely different. Even when Jesus calls the disciples, I love what Shannon said about calling hardworking people. Sometimes I wonder, what does fishing have to do with telling people about Jesus? But fishing, how many of you ever fish? Right? Step one of being a successful fisher is to go where the fish are, right? You don't catch any fish if there are no fish to catch. This is step one of evangelism. You have to go where the Christians aren't, right? If you want to bring new people into the church, you have to go talk to people that aren't currently in the church. We'll never be successful at meeting new people or following our call if we don't go where our call can be fulfilled. The Magi follow God by following a star. So when we think about our own call, God is not calling any of us to be any different than who we already are. God is just saying, I know who you are now, follow after me. I challenge you again, I know I keep talking about this, but I challenge you again to go look at Linda's art. I guarantee you that if you have a conversation with Linda, she will tell you about creating art that became so overwhelming and emotional for her, she just knew the Holy Spirit was present in this place. And the reason I can guarantee it is because I've looked at her art and wept, seeing the Holy Spirit move through her art. And she is hearing from God and following God by being who she is, right? Will it be easy? No. I have no idea how far the Magi had to travel, but this is before the time of trains, planes, and automobiles. These wise people were probably walking or on a camel. They were probably crossing mountains and deserts. We have no idea. There are bandits on the road at this point. We have no idea how hard it is. Not to mention, they followed a star. There was no Google map at the end saying, this is your destination. Keep going, right? They didn't put in, and they followed a star, and did you see that for a moment they even got it a little bit wrong because they went to the palace, right? They're like, we were told a king was born here, so we're showing up in the palace to talk to the king because this is where you find the kings. And then it starts a whole nother thing, right? It's inconvenient. It's challenging. Sometimes we get it wrong, but God will always be there to help us back it up and try again in a different way. And if you want to know what it's like to not follow God, that's in the story too. You just have to look at Herod. Herod's decisions are always made from Herod's preferences. They are made out of fear and paranoia. Herod guards his power and his position. He is not listening to God at all. And he is certainly not sharing his wealth with a newborn Messiah. He is hoarding it, right? If you know anything about Herod, you know that this dude made some sketchy decisions. As we think about what it means to be a hero in the faith, we are called to be Herod, not the Magi. Now, I want to tell you that I believe the church's role in all of this is to equip us, to create those spaces and those places where we can learn how to pray more fully, where we can try out some things. I love, by the way, your patience and your hospitality when someone's up here preaching. Maybe we have someone trying to preach for the first time. The church is a place to express what you're hearing from God and to receive accountability and discernment for it, and then to send you out, to send us all out into the world. I want to tell you, I had a thought last night and this morning that what I would love to see happen, and this is not the first time I've had this thought, but it really, really hit me in conjunction with this call, is that what I would love to see is not that Broadway United Methodist Church runs all these programs so that you fulfill your call in the church, but that you fulfill your calls out in the community. Broadway becomes home base where you can grow in perfection and faith. But I would love to see Broadway United Methodist Church be the church where people are excited when our folks show up. I would love us to be the church where I get a call from the chairs of every subcommittee on the Human Services Advisory Council, and they say, hey, we've got this committee that's working on transportation issues in Council Bluffs, and we need some of your people. Do you have people that you can come? That's who I want Broadway to be. I want Broadway to be the church where when we show up with our t-shirts on, because we're going to help, people rejoice. That's who I want us to be. And how that happens is by us saying yes to the call that God has in our lives. Amen? Amen.